As a huge fan of both creature feature and body horror movies, I'm really happy whenever I find or get suggested to me a new movie within those genres that I've never even heard of before. It doesn't tend to happen all that often, but when it does, I look forward to seeing them. And this is one of those occasions. Screamers, which is a 1995 movie, was suggested to me by one of my viewers, and I'm really grateful for that because I'd never even heard of this movie before, and I'm really glad that I have now. Now, incidentally, I've actually bought the sequel to this movie as well, although I haven't watched that one yet. I'm looking forward to that one, and when I do watch it, I do also plan to review that one as well. But for now at least, what's the story with this movie? Well, the story is based around a concept which is relatively unique, and I really like the essential concept, to be honest. It revolves around a futuristic time period where there are two warring factions on this particular planet, and the factions have various types of military attack that they use against each other. And one such attack is a robotic version of a blade or a sword called screamers because of the sound that they make when they come towards you. They make a very distinct, high-pitched whining sound, which is not uncommon for something like a spinning blade or a gearbox, and that's the sound that they make when they come towards you, when they attack you. It's a very distinctive noise, and this is one of these weapons that they've utilised to try and win the battle on this particular planet and on others too. Now, this technology is very efficient, but it also has some dangers even for the people using it. And basically, the main character, played by Peter Weller, who incidentally has been in a lot of cool cult classic movies like this. I hadn't realised that before, but he's in Screamers, he's in a number of RoboCop movies, he's even in Leviathan, which is one of my personal favourites in the subgenre. He's pretty good at these kind of movies, and he's a good leading man in them. But we'll get more into that in a second. For now, he receives a message from another leader on the opposing side of the war, asking for a meeting, a friendly meeting. So he goes out to try and have that meeting, and basically that is where the story goes. You follow him and one other soldier who's with him on this journey to try and meet this other leader to have this meeting. And it revolves around that very simple concept, that simple storyline within a very complex world. And overall, I have to say that I do like what they did with the story. I love the implied backstories that the characters have, although you don't see all of them on screen. I like the lore and the history associated in this fictional world with the wars, the interplanetary aspect of the battles, and also the tech involved in the film. It's a very tech-heavy movie. And speaking of the tech, there are a number of different visual styles used to show off that tech. Most of it is practical effect, which of course I'm a huge fan of, but you've also got stuff like great animatronics, you've got great stop motion, which I'm a huge fan of. I absolutely love seeing stop motion. Even the worst stop motion to me still looks really cool because it just has this strange otherworldly quality to it. The way things move with stop motion, everything from Jason and the Argonauts all the way up to this movie, even with some of the robots. I just love that quality that it has. And probably one of the most famous examples of stop motion is Terminator, which also looks great. But there are other certain aspects of the movie, in particular with the way it's shot, such as the camera quality, and also not so much the tech feel, but the way the people in the movie look in general, that actually I found, and maybe this is just me, but I found that it made the movies feel older and more dated than it actually was. I honestly thought that this movie was like from 1987 or 89 or something like that. I would have bet money that this was from the 80s. It's very much an 80s movie, but it's not. It's from 1995, and that's kind of crazy because it does not look like a 1995 movie. When you think that only a couple of years later we would have The Matrix, the visuals are so different between a movie like that and a movie like this. Now, of course, The Matrix is a milestone landmark film, but still, I personally don't feel that the aesthetic of the movie overall has aged that well. I think that the effects do, because there are certain effects, like practical effects, which are in effect timeless. They always look great and you can appreciate the craftsmanship. But the way the people look, the hairstyles, the way they dress, the very one-dimensional interpretation of what the future would look like, which also has similarities to some other 80s movies and early 90s movies, is definitely there, and for me that hasn't aged as well. I do like the way that the film looks, especially the more wider, open, distant scenery pictures, a lot of which were just that, paintings. They look great, but it's more the personal side of things, the closer you get to it, that it starts to look a bit dated, at least for me. Now, I mentioned earlier on, of course, that Peter Weller is the primary character, and I really enjoyed him in the role. In fact, I think this may actually be my favourite role that I've seen him in so far. I liked him in Leviathan, but he played kind of an expected role in that film, and of course in RoboCop, one of his best known roles, if not his best known role. He's great in that too, but most of the time he's literally playing a cyborg, so you can only give it so much range as far as emotion goes. In this movie, I love the way he played the character, I love the way the character is written. He takes no nonsense from anyone, he's got very little patience for anything, and there are so many really quotable lines from his character, and not just from his, from others as well in the movie. And when you watch the film, you'll know what I mean. There are certain specific things which are said, sometimes a number of times, deliberately, even as a plot point, which are really quotable. The problem is, the film is a cult classic, so how many people will actually get the references is another thing entirely. But those who do get it will know instantly what you're talking about. So with that rough overview of the story and the things that I did and perhaps didn't like as much, what about the individual scores? How does it compare to other movies in the subgenres such as this, which I've reviewed, some which I love, some which are just okay, and maybe some which I'm not even sure about, like Razorback? How does this compare to those? Well, first of all, of course, we have the story and the plot. And for the story and plot of Screamers, I'm going to give it a 6. And the reason why is because I do like what they did with the story. I like the way it pans out. I like the pacing, which can seem a little bit slow to begin with, but that kind of lends itself toward the story. There were certain character reveals and character moments, without, of course, spoiling anything specific, that I did find predictable, to be honest. Sometimes I was wrong, sometimes I was right, so that's fair enough. But I still like the way some of the reveals were carried out. They were handled well, and they were justified, the reveals that did happen. And overall, I basically just liked the story. I liked the concept, I liked the way it was carried out, and although the pacing is, as I said, a little slow for this kind of movie, it kind of suited the plot. Because at the end of the day, one of the things which I would say this movie does well is it takes a concept which is usually very broad and very globe-trotting, such as an intergalactic or planetary battle movie, but it makes it very small and very personal. You don't meet a huge amount of people in the film, even though it's based around soldiers. And most movies that revolve around soldiers have a lot of characters coming in and out all the time, some in passing, some that you stick with more, some who live, some who die. And although there are aspects of that here, there are far fewer characters because of the circumstances, which allows you to flesh out those characters more, to be around them more, to like or dislike them more, and it made the concept of this massive war much more personal, and I did like that. Now, as far as the characters in the movie, the casting, the motivations, the way they're written, I'm going to give it a 7, because I do like the characters in this film. There are a couple of people who I don't recall seeing in other movies, doubtless they have been, I just haven't seen them. There are some who I do recognise, and the most notable one is, of course, Peter Weller. He's the biggest name draw, and he's the best character in the film, not too surprisingly, but I do like many of the characters in this film. There are really likeable people, there are funny people, there are naive people. I like the characters very much. Now, not all of them are as well-rounded or as justified in some ways as you might like them to be, which is why I'm not rating it even higher, but I do like the ensemble that they had. Peter Weller, though, easily steals the show. What then about the visuals, the practical effects, special effects, makeup, animatronics in this case? Well, for that, again, I'm going to give it a 7, because although I said that I do love it, which I do. I love the animatronics, I love the stop motion, I love the distance shots of scapes and scenery. As I said earlier, some aspects, and not small aspects either, some big aspects of the film, especially the way it's shot and the quality of the camera work, has not aged well. And I don't mean that in a good way, because sometimes films don't age well, but it's kind of endearing. Other times it just looks dated. And to me, unfortunately, this one looks a bit dated. Now, maybe you can get a better quality copy, but with that said, the version that I purchased was a pretty good copy anyway, so I don't think it's going to change it that much. And to be honest, it's that overall aesthetic of the film which stops it from getting maybe even an 8 or a 9. And I'm sure other people would disagree and absolutely love the visuals. I love certain aspects of the visuals, for sure. It's reminiscent of certain other movies, which are pretty obvious when you see the film. And overall, I did like it, just not necessarily as much as I wanted to. And that brings us up next to the audio of the film. Not just the audio quality, but obviously the music, the soundtrack, sound effects, creature effects where applicable. And for that, I'm going to give it another 6, because the music is sometimes really enjoyable, but sometimes to me, especially towards the start of the film, it felt kind of out of place. There are a couple of songs specifically used which just felt kind of weird to me. They didn't really fit the scene. But again, of course, music is very personal. What one person loves, another person won't, and that's just the way it was for me. I didn't dislike the soundtrack, I didn't dislike the music. I did like it for the most part, and that's why I am rating it above par with a 6. And finally, for the most personal to me, the rewatchability factor, the entertainment of the film, for that I'm actually going to give it another 7, which is a pretty decent score. That is higher than quite a number of other horror movies which I've seen, which I have reviewed, and which I also will review in the future. That's not a bad score by any means. It is a movie that I think you can appreciate more with a second viewing, and it's the kind of movie, kind of like some others which I've reviewed as well, like Leviathan or Razorback or The Ruins or Green Room, where people who love it will really love it. And I can totally appreciate that, and it's not that I don't get that. I see why people would love this film. It's definitely got that cult classic appeal, and there are definitely aspects which I really love about the movie. Overall though, it's a combination of two primary things which stop it from scoring higher in that regard for me personally, and those are, for one thing, the overall visuals, as I said, and the second is the pacing. The pacing isn't bad, the pacing I think is perfect for the story that it's telling, but a slower film can sometimes hurt rewatchability, and when it comes to selecting a movie to watch again, this wouldn't be one of my first choices. Even though I did enjoy it, I would pick something like Leviathan, for instance, over this, if I'm going to watch one of the two, or if I had to choose this or The Thing, or this or Alien, or this or really any number of other films in the same kind of genre. And I don't just mean giants of the genre like Alien and The Thing, but other obscure ones as well, such as some of the films that I have mentioned on the channel before. I wouldn't necessarily always choose this one as my first choice. With that being said though, I definitely did not dislike the film. I like it, but I wouldn't say that I love it. However, as I mentioned earlier, I could totally understand why some people do. And overall, as a tabulation of those 5 categories put together, I'm giving 1995 Screamers a score of 3.3 out of 5, which is pretty decent, it has to be said, especially for a movie which isn't as well known. They do have a much more difficult time getting a good score, because the majority of movies which deserve to be seen more do tend to be seen more by this point. This movie's been out for a number of years, and yet it still isn't talked about as much as even something like Leviathan, from what I've seen. Maybe that's just the circles that I talk in, but as I said, I'd never heard of this movie before. It definitely, though, deserves to be seen more, and by more people, and that's one of the reasons why I did this review. So overall, if you haven't seen it, if you're a sci-fi fan, if you're a body horror fan, if you're a techno horror fan, then it definitely pushes those buttons and does it well, I would say, for the most part. So go into it with an open mind. It's a very unique film in the way it tells the story and with the visuals that it has, and if that sounds like something that appeals to you, I think the end product probably will. But that's it for this pick overall. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, Thanks for watching.